Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on the Copper Club podcast. We're doing something a little bit different this week. As I said on the last week's episode, I'm joined by Kish, fan analyst, and he's probably doing himself a disservice, probably a little bit of a football expert. Kish, we sort of first crossed paths with Rondo reports. I think that'll be a blast from the past for some of our hardcore listeners. But look, great to have you back on the podcast. And look, the floor is yours. Introduce yourself, let us know who you are, and obviously hype up your TikTok, which is another reason why you're on the podcast. And I'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm Kish. A bit of a, I guess, content creator slash analyst. I think I sort of try to make content that's a bit deeper than the average content creator. So going into the more finer details of player analysis, team analysis. I think I started Rondo Reports a few years ago, which was like a channel which was looking to kind of find the next big stars around the world. And kind of not necessarily hyping them up, but talking about where they're at, what their strengths are, and what their potential weaknesses are, and how they kind of get to that top level of the potential they have. So that did really well. And then at the moment, I work in football for the Coach's Voice, who obviously interview quite high profile managers, and I also make my own content on the side. I'm a Spurs fan, so a lot of my content is Spurs related, but I also have my TikTok, which is kish.100, which is around more general football takes, really. But again, trying to look at the kind of details of football.
Yeah, Kish's TikTok, definitely check that out. And it was a little bit of inspiration as to why he's on this particular podcast. It's not just from Rondo Reports days. Kish, you featured in one of the Copper Club magazines, I believe. I think it was issue
Yes,
3.
I think I wrote about Esteval, I think, if I'm not mistaken, which obviously has aged very well. He started
We dropped that one in.
fantastically. Yeah, I think, to be honest, you didn't have to be an expert to see how much potential he had. But yeah, I'm not like an expert in South American football, but I've always loved, obviously, South American players, like most of us do. The kind of personality and entertainment value they bring to European football, which I think at the moment can be a little bit robotic, as a lot of people have kind of said. And I really like seeing players that come and bring a bit of personality, but that can also fit in with that European structure, but then perform outside of those kind of regimented patterns and structures of modern football. And I think a lot of the time those players are South American, or they have pretty South American influence. So I think I look at someone like Lamine Yamal, and to me, he plays like a South American, especially like a Brazilian. And you can see that in his game, and you can see that he's obviously a massive fan of Neymar. And I think South America in general has influenced football so much that I think you now see some of that kind of play in European players as well.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why we run this particular podcast. And if you are familiar with Kish's TikTok, or if you haven't, he did a really good series around buying the dip, which is sort of inspired this episode, which is why he's on this particular episode. So we're going to run through a few names currently in Brazil, one or two outside of the country or the continent even, and just run through them and see where they're at. Do we like them? Is it worth purchasing them now, sitting on them, or are they an avoid? So we'll add that, maybe a club or two which they could go to as well. We'll drop that in. But we're going to start with, we're going to work backwards up to certain forwards. And we're actually going to start with 2 left backs in Brazil. And for those who aren't familiar with these players, you probably think that's going to be quite boring. But how wrong you are, because these are 2 of the most exciting left backs in Brazil I've seen for a very long time. Look, we grew up with Roberto Carlos, Cafu, but Brazil are currently through this transition period at the moment where Carlo Ancelotti is still relying on European players. But these are 2 players who Brazilian fans actually want to see within the national side, one younger than the other. So that move to Europe could happen. So we'll start back with the 22-year-old Cruzeiro left back, Kaique, who has worked his way through the ranks with Cruzeiro, still a one-man club. last season is where we saw him play 15, 16 games or so, find his feet. But as Cruzeiro, right now, challenging Flamengo for the title, they've been excellent all season. And Kaique has earned that left back spot. And only at 22, there's still an opportunity for him to move to Europe. I think Kish agree with me here or not, but I think maybe because of that John Arias move, but we're starting to see players get an opportunity a little bit later down the line. Over recent years, it's always been if you're 18, 19 and successful, you're past your sell-by date, which is just ridiculous. Some players need to mature, right? And Kaique looks like he could be one of those.
Yeah, I think the Club World Cup actually did real good things for global football, in terms of just putting showcasing players that potentially are outside of Europe still at maybe less desirable ages, in terms of an investment point of view, but still obviously have a lot to give. And that Arias move obviously showed that. Um, I think, yeah, I think the concern I think at buying from South America or a non-European league is probably the transition stage, and I think that in history there has been a sort of need for the transition stage because European football is so different. But I do think there's always space for players who haven't quite cut it and then suddenly find their feet. I think development is always a rocky road, and not everyone follows that kind of steady increase in level. People have ups and downs in their career like they do in normal life. Um, and I don't think I think the days are gone where it's just if you haven't made it at 19 to Europe, then that's it. I think Kaique for me looks like a pretty ready-made fullback for Europe. I think he's very polished. He is very good 1v1 defensively, very accomplished on the ball, and just looks like a refined footballer. And sometimes I think the concern with the things we love about South American football could be a concern for a European club, how like chaotic it might be, or how, yeah, I guess up and down and unpredictable it can be. But I think he strikes me as a fullback who is very accomplished, consistent, very good 1v1, tidy on the ball as well, although I think he's not like a world beater in terms of his attacking output. So yeah, I think at 22, those attributes are really important because, often modern fullbacks as well get the kind of he can't defend brush often because fullbacks nowadays are more offensive than defensive. But I think he looks like someone who could really hold his own at a higher level, I think. And yeah, I've been impressed from what I've seen. What are your thoughts on him?
I was really surprised to see that he only had 3 assists to his name when I went through his stats today. I swear I've seen him produce more, but maybe that's because when I went back through some footage before we jumped on this podcast, he's almost, and I've used it a few times in this podcast, but the assist before the assist, because he
Yeah,
doesn't take too much time on the ball. And I think that is a huge tick for me. He doesn't make it about him. He doesn't try to overdo it. And I always think that shows a really high level of intelligence to just get it out of his feet. And it's just the weight of the pass, whether he just strokes it down the line. He's really good at knowing whether to go down the channels, but also looking to play the ball just inside as well, inside the flank, if that makes sense, because most fullbacks will just get it out of their feet and knock it long and think that their job's done, where he's actually thinking, right, where's the clever movement, but where's the space? So I was surprised with only 3 assists, but when you go back through it, it makes sense. He does like to get forward. I think he very much that he has that in his locker, and if he wants to go to another club move to Europe, there may be a coach there to be able to bring that a little bit more out of him. But Cruzeiro have got so much attacking talent anyway in front of him. He sort of knows his job and doesn't get caught out of position. And as you said, very good defender, which needs to be pointed out with defenders these days. It sounds stupid to say, but he's only got 7 yellow cards in 30 appearances. And I actually think for Brazilian and South American football as a whole, like that's actually not a bad record. So shows that he doesn't dive in, shows that he's not careless. But I just think his intelligence to know if it's just 2 or 3 touches he needs, but if he has space, like he will try to get into the area, explore it. Like he scored in the last couple of weeks against Bragantino, which was his first of the season, admittedly, but he's growing in confidence. And as Cruzeiro push towards this title, we are seeing a player there who's not just happy to sit in his left back role and actually want to push forward and help his team out, which again is another huge tick for me. So struggling to see flaws. I think maybe you've touched on it there in terms of his output, but in a different environment, another season at Cruzeiro or whatever they achieve at the end of the season, like we may start to see a little bit more there. So I think you can definitely see why Brazilian fans want him in the national team and why they were a little bit disappointed that there was just European names called up by Carlo Ancelotti. So at 22, I think you could get him for a reasonable fee as well. I'm not sure where that next move would be. I don't know, Kish, I don't know if you have any clubs or leagues in mind, but when I was trying to, putting this episode together, I was looking more at like La Liga because that might give him the opportunity to break forward and be more confident where the power and the overall pace of the Premier League could potentially sort of overwhelm him. And then that's another South American player who's come across and we apparently have overhyped, which we've been told off a few times before. So somewhere like La Liga seems to be a good fit, but I actually think now would be the ideal time to buy. It's not necessarily buying the dip, but buying on the rise, really. And it's being be a clever move in the stock market. Kish, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think what in terms of that kind of decision making and just intelligence to know what to do at the right time is why I say he's just so accomplished. In terms of making the right decisions every time is a as a fullback especially I think is so important. They're often key cogs in the system, and I also think what that allows for is actually using him quite adaptably. So playing him maybe in a more reserved role in certain games, but then maybe having
Mm.
him overlap more in certain games, maybe even inverting into midfield. And if you have a fullback who's pretty well rounded, like him, I think that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of system, and I think modern managers love that. So I think a lot of clubs would bite at that. Um, but yeah, I think you're right about the jump to Premier League. I mean, the Premier League's become more physical than ever, um, and so yeah, if you're a fullback and you're not necessarily outstanding physically, you can struggle, especially initially. So I think that the La Liga makes sense. I think for sure.
Let's move across to arguably probably one of my favourite players in Brazil at the moment, and it is another left back, but he doesn't have the characteristics of a left back. He has the characteristics of a left winger, and that's Bahia's Luciano Juba, who's only, he's 26, but he's only started to really make an impression over the last couple of seasons. But I mean, if you're impressed with Kaiki's 7 yellow cards, Juba's only had 2 in 25 league appearances, but more impressively, 5 goals, 2 assists. Now, this man can score an absolute rocket. Especially Bahia is so dominant at home, which plays to his advantage, but he's been allowed to be let off the leash and attack. I think because Bahia don't have an out and out goal scorer, it gives them a real opportunity to drive forward. But I mean, he is an amazing YouTube highlight reel if people just want to dive in and check him out. But yes, he's 26, but we've already brought up, in case you've already brought up, sorry, the Club World Cup and John Arias getting an opportunity in the Premier League. And there's been even more shouts for Juba to be in the Brazilian national team and like quite a lot of insults thrown to Ancelotti's way for him not even being called up for these friendlies against Japan and South Korea in the next couple of weeks. What's your thoughts on Juba? Very different to Kaiki, but it doesn't put me off that he's 26. I'd be rolling the dice because you probably pick him up for a bargain price.
Yeah, I think like you said, the YouTube highlights are crazy. He's popping up in like sort of not even just left winger positions, sort of like left inside forward positions at times, making the box. And yeah, I think it makes for a really fun watch. Um, and it's the kind of player that you almost don't want to put in a European club just because of that could restrict his game, and the entertainment side of his game. I think a player like that, you love giving freedom. I think the shooting from range. Obviously, he's got great ball striking. Really kind of athletic and creative in his dribbling. yeah, that will to constantly want to attack and affect the game in the final third, I think is massive for him. I think I have some slight concerns over his build. I think he's quite small and slight, even though he's quite athletically strong. I think, like I said, the physicality in European game, especially in the Premier League, is massive. So that could potentially concern me. I haven't seen enough, I guess, of his 1v1 defending, but I think, yeah, that would concern me. But I think in terms of entertainment value and attacking output, and you're right. I think in a ball dominant side, there's always space for an extra kind of attacker, especially as a lot of clubs now, they build with a three, and so often one of their fullbacks might tuck in to form that three, but the other fullback is given license to kind of be a winger, and that is a role that really would suit him, where you kind of have the protection of the other fullback tucking in, and then you have a fullback who has much more freedom, and often we see that shape take place, and the fullback who is given that license doesn't actually have the necessary attributes to make that worth it, because they're traditional fullbacks. So when you see an actual player who can really affect the game in the final third, that's when I think that kind of shape really works a treat.
I'm going to challenge you. I hear what you're saying. I'm going to challenge you a little bit because he reminds me of a technical Kyle Walker. And what I mean by that is he has serious pace, but he also has his intelligence to read the game is pretty good. So, like, defensively, look, Bahia have conceded one of the least amount of goals in Brazil this season, and obviously he's their starting left back, so he's part of that. So as much as I'm keen to applaud him going forward and definitely having that Brazilian South American flair for sure, like, I think when you have pace, that can just bail you out of so many problems. But I think it's also really important to address how good he is on set pieces, because Kish, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't really see left backs on corners attacking set pieces in Europe anymore. It seems to be a dying art, but Juba does. And now that's where he's picked up a fair few of his assists or caused problems. And if you're seeing a left back with that technical ability being trusted to play high up the pitch and also lead the charge with set pieces, for me, that's another tick. And like, for a nation like Brazil, who are always, yes, they've had a lot of problems over the last couple of years, but going to a World Cup with Carlo Ancelotti, where in the group stage they'll want to pile on the pressure, whoever they face, like to have someone like Juba add to the attack rather than be a static left back, just doing or ticking the boxes of what you're meant to do. I think that's only a plus, and I think like a European nations would struggle with Juba because they wouldn't expect it, which is why Brazil over the years have been so successful on the world stage. It's by having these players who have that unknown quantity to them. And it's just a real shame that I think Ancelotti was a huge coup for Brazil, but I think it will stifle them a little bit because he's always going to go to European names who he trusts. But Ancelotti, if you're listening, Kayiki, Juba, two players you should be calling up for sure. Now, we'll move across a little bit further up the pitch, because I know there's a player for Vasco who we've spoken about a lot on the podcast, and Kish, I know you're a huge fan of him as well, and that's Ryan, who's 19 years old. And look, I said at the start of the season, this is a huge year for the winger/forward. He needs to improve his output. He scored 1 goal last season. Now he's already on 12 this year across multiple competitions, 1 in 2 in Copa do Brazil, 7 in the league, which is really impressive for a team who are currently sat in 12th spot. And I think working under Fernando Diniz has been a really good opportunity for him to work with him and bring out his confidence. Diniz is someone who recognises young stars, puts an arm around them, and really gets the best out of them. And that's what we've seen with Ryan. He's more composed in front of goal, but I think his header the other week against Flamengo at the Maracanã sort of showed that he has the confidence to create something for himself rather than getting into good positions and then hoping that he converts. We saw him struggle in front of goal last season. But it also helps that Philippe Coutinho is having the season of his life. And there's even been talk about him getting back into the Brazilian national team. But we won't talk about Coutinho on this episode. But Kish, over to you to sing the praises of Ryan, who's just improved massively this season. And look, big clubs have been interested for a long time. It seems to have gone a bit quiet, but maybe this is the ideal time to strike.
Yeah, so to be fair, Spurs have been rumoured around him, I think two different sources this week where they sent scouts over to watch him, I'm pretty sure. Um, the first time I saw him, I just loved watching him because he's so powerful in terms of the way he can carry the ball over large distances, but then he mixes that with like the tightest and neatest footwork. So much flair combined with power. And that's what made me make comparisons with Adriano, the kind of football fans' favorite back in the day. Um, because of one, the left foot, obviously, but also the power combined with amazing footwork. And Ryan has obviously been playing predominantly off the right, and I do get that because I think having that dribbling ability, I think dribbling ability mixed with power as well out wide is really useful in terms of 1v1 duels, because once you do get that bit of separation, if you're strong, that defender's not going to recover because you can hold them off while you've got that bit of distance. Um, and also with his kind of ball striking ability, I know it's been inconsistent, but when he does get it right, he hits them really, really well. And having that coming in off the right flank gives you, I think, more opportunities to get those shots off because it's less congested when you're coming off wide areas. But for me, I really like the idea of seeing him as a nine down the line. I think that headed goal last game speaks to that as well. I think if he can really develop his game centrally, he'd be such a nuisance because he's got everything potentially you want in a striker in terms of that really good technical level, but also that physical level. He's big, he's well built, he's got great shooting on him. And I really like the idea of that being his development down the line. But I do think I understand why that would stifle his development at the moment because strikers sometimes, they might go through a whole game without touching the ball that much, and you want someone like him on the ball constantly. I also think, yeah, you get less time on the ball as a striker. You're more kind of working off the ball. But I do really like the idea of seeing him centrally at some point, especially also with that ball carrying ability,
Mm.
where in transitions as well, being able to carry it centrally in transitions is such a cheat code. Being able to carry it out wide is one thing, but if you can carry it through challenges and over large distances down the middle, then that is so threatening to the opposition goal. And I do think that's something that he could definitely bring to a team. So I'm a huge fan of him.
I think he was Vasco's youngest goal scorer in the league. I think he got his first when he was days after him turning 17, and then instantly there were actually legit reports about Real Madrid being interested. Bear that in mind for later down the podcast when we talk about somebody else on this show. But I think that just goes to show straight away. And like, I didn't see that game live at the time, but when I saw Real Madrid linked South America, I was like, right, okay, let's go back through it. And the size of him at 17 was ridiculous. And obviously, he's only grown from there. And I think how he's progressed over the last 12 months has been huge. I had huge reservations over him in front of goal. I was worried that he was going to become one of these South American players who just couldn't finish, i.e., maybe Angelo, who went to Chelsea and is now at Al Nassr. Similar sort of vibes to that. But he has really progressed under Denise. But the question I'll put back to you, Kish, is I know you said Spurs were looking at him, which I'm sure you're very excited about, but would it be a case to ideally leave him in Brazil for another year? Or would it be a case of a Premier League club buying him and potentially loaning him somewhere to like Belgium or whatever to find his feet in Europe? What do you think would be a good career path for him over the next 18 months?
I think he'd be ready to step up to Europe. I think you have to pick your club very, very carefully. And I think Spurs have actually done a pretty good job at developing the young players they've bought recently, in terms of not giving them too many minutes, but giving them enough minutes to really kind of grow. Um, I think for me, the step up is always the first step to Europe should always be a club, I think, that's especially for attacking players, that's ball dominant in their league. And allows you to kind of express yourself and grow on the ball, and you as an attacking player, you get constant chances to show your quality. So they're the the Ajaxes, the Portos, the Benficas, um, those sorts of clubs that kind of dominate their league, and then you also end up playing quite high level matches as well. I think that's always a perfect step up for a player, and we've seen that countless times over the years. And I'd always think that about a kind of high level South American player. I think that's quite a nice seamless transition into European football without getting chucked into a very competitive league that every game is kind of do or die, and can obviously affect a player's confidence because one bad game and you don't really get any respite from that. So yeah, I think that kind of move to me makes more sense, but I kind of would recommend that move to most South American young players.
I feel really protective over players because we've spoke about so many good players who've moved to Europe over the last year or two, and then they've just been thrown back, and then a European audience will sort of get onto us to be like, hang on a minute, you said he was good. So ideally, I'd probably like Ryan to stay for another year, but I think if he did, there'd be a queue around the block, and Vasco could probably charge double because I think more eyes would be on him. So it's a really difficult one, but yeah, the next move is always incredibly important. So look, one to keep an eye on. I thought that he may have moved now, to be honest with you, whether that was his choice or not. I thought a club would take the opportunity. It's been quite nice to see him stay in Brazil. So maybe with him being at Vasco, it's gone under the radar. I think if he was doing this at Flamengo, Palmeiras, Botafogo, we would have probably already seen that move happen. So it's been quite nice to see him develop, and those concerns I had at the start of the season, I no longer have. So definitely a top talent to keep an eye on.
I actually have a question quickly
Sure.
before.
Yeah. Shoot.
So I always think like I understand why players would. There's always reason to stay in South America. What do you think is the rush for often players to leave before they're potentially ready to leave? And is it kind of that big contract? Is it the excitement? What do you think makes players make that decision to move so quickly when they know that if they give it a year or year two's time, they might even be more ready?
I think it's a few things. A, you can turn around and say, look, football moves so quickly. Will they get an opportunity like this again? I sometimes think it's bad agents telling them that they may not get a contract like this ever again. I think it's difficult when, like, you look at Vitor Roque, for example, and Endrick, who we will talk about towards the end of this podcast. Real Madrid come across, Barcelona come across, you are sort of sold the dream because they'll be positioning it to them to be like, look, you will be replacing Lewandowski, you will be stepping in, like, this is who we, like, everyone knows obviously who those clubs are, and it's the same in the Premier League. But I don't think necessarily clubs are looking after them. I think everyone's trying to beat the rush, and with the market becoming more accessible after Brexit, this is why we're seeing more people dive into it. But I don't think there's a lot of player care. We could dive into loads of examples. Paulinho, who went to Bayer Leverkusen, they didn't look after his attributes, and then he went back to Brazil and won the Golden Boot the same year. Carlo Jorge is now the top goal scorer in Brazil with Cruzeiro. He went to Juventus and wasn't wanted by the manager. So I think these managers and coaches, it's so obvious that they aren't interlinked with the scouting department. And so these young players coming over and they're going, oh, by the way, these players will need time, where you as the manager are under a lot of pressure to deliver within your season or half a season or less. So some managers will look at them and be like, they don't know the language, they need time bedding in, like, that's their problem, not mine. No, I'm not saying everyone's like that, but I think there are so many issues and everything needs to fall into place off the pitch. I've always been quite honest to say, I think 95% of how a young Brazilian settles in a new environment is all about off the pitch, and it's 5% on it. They know what they're doing on the pitch. They can all adapt. They can all go to the gym, etc. But yeah, I think there's a few of those issues which maybe overlap a little bit. Now, I can use a modern day example of Jair Cunha, who's an outstanding centre back who's gone to Nottingham Forest, who bought 4 Botafogo players in one particular window. He hasn't been registered for the Europa League. He's casually sat on the bench once or twice, hasn't picked up any minutes, even with Murillo being out injured. Now, would it have been best for him to stay in Brazil for another year or two? Yes. But then maybe Nottingham Forest fans or teams of that size would argue, well, then Real Madrid or Barcelona would come calling. So it's a really difficult one to answer. This is why I'm happy for players like Kaique or Juba, John Arias, a little bit older, to have those few years and develop, figure out who they are, even as a person, right? Without getting too deep, you're still a young kid at 18, 19. To be thrown into a completely different environment is a real challenge. So I think it's the money, it's the agents, it's the lure of the Premier League, where I think sometimes just sitting on it for a year you'll be rewarded more. But look, football moves so quickly, doesn't it? So sometimes you just don't get the opportunity, and it's not always down to the players before they're shoved on that flight. So yeah, a worrying part of the game for sure. But one I've probably spent too much time on. But good question. I'm more protective because I love seeing these players develop in Brazil, Argentina, wherever. And then when they come across, and if they don't perform within 20 minutes for a club, it's just apparently it's the end of their career. I went to go and watch Valentin Barco live when he was on loan at Seville. They played him at left back, and I think I've been banging on about he is not a left back. They pulled him off at half time, and his loan was pretty much cut short, and his career at Brighton ended. But he went to Strasbourg, and now he's playing in his right position and flourishing. So it's actually looking after the player and getting the best out of them rather than just pigeonholing them into a certain position around the squad you already have. So loads of red flags for me. It's occasionally a green one. Maybe I've been a bit too negative there, but I think we need to be open and honest. Social media just gets too excited going, this is the next Neymar, this is the next Murillo now, whatever it may be. But it's not always the case.
Yeah.
One of those players who is still an enigma, before we move on and close with Endrick, I'm keen to hear what Kish has got to say about him, but we're going to close the Brazilian part off with Corinthians' is Yuri Alberto, who we have spoke about endless amount of times on this podcast. Now 24, a player who did go to Europe, but it was cut short when he moved to Russia, came back to Brazil last season, picked up the Golden Boot. There's only 15 goals. It wasn't a huge competition last season for that particular award. But he is an enigma, and I think his performance against Flamengo, if you haven't seen that, just go and check it out on YouTube. Even if it's just the goals, because he tried a Panenka penalty and missed it, which was classic Yuri Alberto. But then he scored a really good goal in the second half, where it's a little bit like Theo Walcott when he doesn't think he can produce really good stuff, but when he overthinks a situation, this is where we see the Yuri Alberto, where Brazilian fans mock him. Now, I will add in the fact that I think last season he was a huge success because Memphis Depay was fit. Rodrigo Garro, who's got 11 assists and won that particular award, was fit. Both have been injured massively this season. But Yuri Alberto did so well last year because he played in a 4-4-2, which is extremely rare in this day and age. Now they have Dorival Jr., ex-Brazilian manager, in charge, playing predominantly one up top. He scored 6 goals in 16 games, and he's not quite found his feet there either. So I think it's pretty obvious where I sit. There's always frustration around Yuri Alberto, and I think it's probably because he is frustrating to watch in front of goal. There's no question about that. But it's a prime example of if you buy a player, he will operate extremely well if he has a good strike partner and a relationship with him. If you try and put him in a different formation in Europe, his career will fall and he'll be back in Brazil classed as a disappointment. So, Kish, what's your thoughts on Yuri Alberto? Because he's had a few opportunities now.
Yeah, so from what I've seen of him, he's big. He's pretty technical for his size. I think one of the main issues I've had with him from watching little bits is he feels a little bit clunky. In terms of the ability to create separation cleanly to get his shots off. And I think often you see him have quite wild shooting attempts, not necessarily because his shooting technique is bad, but because he's off balance or he hasn't set the shot up very well. And that that is a big issue. I think someone who can't create good environments to get those shots off is always an issue. And I think part of that is that slight clunkiness. And so he might kind of shift the ball, but he hasn't shifted it in a way where he's dropped a shoulder and shifted it where he's bought that bit of space, extra space for him to get the shot off, where it's a bit too predictable. So maybe that shot gets blocked, or it's a little bit too close to the player, so he's kind of off balance while he's shooting. And those are kind of criticisms I've had of someone like Gyökeres, who's moved to Arsenal. I think it's a similar thing where the technical level to match the size needs to be so good to be able to, at that size, get away from players in and around the box. When he does get kind of space and clean opportunities, I think he's got the abilities for sure. But that's always my concerns with those strikers, especially strikers who are that kind of strong and built. I think there's always that concern: can they create their own opportunities, or if they can't, is there other things they can bring away from that? So I think someone like Haaland, we don't really normally see him score those kind of goals, but he's so quick and his movement's so good, and he's so lethal in front of goal that he doesn't necessarily need to make his own chances in that way. But you, as a striker, you need to have something which is outstanding that puts you above the rest.
Yeah, that's my problem with Alberto. I completely agree. I think the fact that last season he scored, but he also missed one or two chances because Corinthians at home were unbelievable. I don't think they lost a game in the whole of 2024. They were relentless under their old head coach, which meant that he had 3 or 4 opportunities a game and maybe only scored 1 or 2. Now, this season, Corinthians have done a huge 180. Like, they're just not performing anywhere like they were last season, and he's only getting 1 opportunity a game, and if he's not scoring it, we're in the Yuri Alberto of old, which is why when he's been linked to the Premier League over the last few years, it's always been a hard no for me. Last season, I was really doubting myself to be like, am I reading this all wrong? Because he's scoring every week, but it's because he fits a certain system, which is so important. Like, if you make that purchase, the play, like for a big player, especially for a goal scorer, he needs to fit into the system you already have and it be replicated for the success to continue. So Yuri Alberto, I think there is an opportunity for him in Europe. I don't think it's going to be like the Premier League, La Liga. You can see why he originally had that move to Russia. That made a lot of sense. So I don't think it's going to be anything high profile. I think it's just a case of a lot of people going on SofaScore, for example, seeing who's scoring the goals and being like, look, he's at the time 22, 23 young strikers scoring goals. We should be looking at him. But when you actually sort of put him under the lens a little bit, we see the flaws. So he is a really good striker on his day, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a certain level for him. Let's move across to the last player we want to talk about. Such an interesting player. One maybe you could, well, I certainly think you could predict it with the move to Real Madrid based on my previous rant about players going a little bit, moving across too early. But we'll talk about Real Madrid's Endrick, because Kish, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on him, because absolutely electric in Brazil. I don't think, apart from for Esteval, because Esteval had his glory season last year, so Endrick was on the scene before him. Endrick, as I said previously, single-handedly won Palmeiras that title in 2023 now. Like, he was unbelievable. Like, I know he's small, but like the size of him, like the size of his legs, how strong he is, like the goals he scored, like. And we've seen it once or twice for Real Madrid that he doesn't even need to have much space with the ball to generate power. Now, I know there's probably more articles about his personality off the pitch than on the pitch, because we haven't seen that many minutes. And he'd obviously agreed to go to Real Madrid. And then before he'd arrived, Kylian Mbappe was on the scene, which Endrick and his entourage probably weren't told. That sort of leads me back to my rant a little bit about how these young lads are sold the dream, and Endrick was probably sold the Real Madrid dream, which may still happen for him, who knows. But I think a loan move last season was a real opportunity missed. And this season, I know he spent a lot of time injured. But Kish, talk to me about Endrick. Are you frustrated? Do you see a future at Real Madrid, or do you think he's a bit like Vitor Roque? Does he go out on loan to somewhere like Betis and sort of show people what he's all about before people forget?
To be honest, I really like the league the league fit for him. So I do like him in La Liga. I think that's a league that can suit him. I mean, so many good players have failed at Madrid, and I don't think it's necessarily reflective of where he's at in terms of development. It's often a lot bigger than that. I mean, Real Madrid don't seem to plan; they just seem to be reactive each window. And if they haven't had success that season before, then it's panic stations, and they go and buy and buy and buy. Um, and so I don't think it's easy to make it as a young player at Real Madrid, and we've seen that countless times. There's amazing players that have failed at Real Madrid, like Ian Robben, Wesley Sneijder, so many over the years. So I wouldn't say that's reflective of necessarily where he's at. In terms of what I was talking about with Yuri Alberto, in terms of that, him lacking the ability to create his own shooting opportunities, I think Endrick's the opposite. So Endrick's like his ability to shift it and shoot and create that separation so quickly that defenders don't have a time to react and block it is incredible. And that's because he's so explosive. And then the ball striking to match it, he doesn't need any backlift. He hits it with so much venom. And I also think he's got that. It's really hard to kind of often understand a player's personality because we don't see hardly anything barring what's on the pitch. But you can tell with Endrick, there's an innate belief and confidence when he gets in front of goal, and he backs his ability. And some of the finishes that he does, he doesn't take the safe option. He's just ruthless with it. And that's something that struck me, because at 17 to have that kind of ability and confidence in your own ability is massive. And that's why I thought he was going to be, or I still think he's going to be a star. I think his size is really good in terms of where he's built, but he's obviously quite small. So I think what he needs to work on is that hold up play and being able to link play in games when maybe you're not just a player in and around the box. And to play a striker at Real Madrid, you need to be complete. And I think that is a slight kind of development point for his game. Obviously, the injuries haven't helped either because you don't get the development time, but also he's not going to get crazy amount of minutes at Real Madrid anyway. Like I said before, I think a team like Porto, Benfica, Ajax are great for development. I really like those kind of moves for him where he plays just 30 plus games in a season. Let him do what he does best, which is finish chances and be ruthless in front of goal. And that, I think, for a player like him, when he gets that rhythm back, he'll just go on and on and on. And it did feel like to a point that he was a little bit untouchable. Like everything he touched was turning to gold, and the kind of reputation he was gaining, it just felt like he was like the golden boy. And so these kind of downs in a career are always going to come, and it's about kind of how both him and his entourage react to that, because there needs to be a point where he has to kickstart his career again. But I think the talent is incredible, and not only the talent, but the belief and kind of innate confidence as well.
It's got Kanye West confidence for sure, where that's a good trait, especially a club like Real Madrid, but the media are definitely portraying him to be sort of something he's not at times. And I think because he came with all these taglines and headlines himself, obviously all this ability as well, and then for him not to be a quiet lad and sort of wear his heart on his sleeve and voice his opinion, that's automatically a few outlets have jumped on that, and they are trying to portray him in this way and make out he's a flop because he's not had any minutes. But as soon as you mentioned Benfica there, my mind just went to Marcus Leonardo, and like that seemed a dream fit. And I know his move ended quickly because he moved across to Saudi, but he really found his feet instantly, obviously going from Brazil to Portugal anyway. Like it's probably the easiest route into Europe. But I don't know if Endrick sometimes, maybe Endrick needs a season or so before he realises that he is not the starter for Real Madrid, because he does have such an ego on him. Like it is okay to still go to another Champions League club, develop, bag the goals, make a point on the pitch, and then return to Real Madrid. Like you're not going to do it from day one, where there was almost that impression from him and his camp that he would come in and also just like automatically start. But maybe Mbappe ruined that. But I completely agree with you there. It's definitely not the end for sure. Like there's only been like two or three players who have left Brazil in recent years where I've been like, these are almost flawless, or these are definitely players who are going to have top careers and can win it all. And I still think Endrick is one of those. So definitely a case of watch this space. But look, it's been
I
brilliant to
think
have.
yeah, I was
Go
just
on, Kish.
I think with those stars, I think we're in a landscape. Two things. I think one, media love to kind of portray our footballers are so boring in the media and they don't have any personality. But as soon as someone does show a bit of personality, they jump on it. And you've seen that with Lamine Yamal as well. I think people are really
Yeah.
trying to tear these guys down. But I also think to have all that, I think this is becoming more and more of a problem. But with the rise of social media, to have all that hype at 16, 15 even at times is really, really difficult to deal with. They're kids, they're children, and they're getting all this attention. Suddenly, completely famous, known by everyone in the whole world. I don't think it's a normal experience to have, and I think these kids are gonna often make mistakes off the pitch, and that doesn't make them bad people or that they're flops or they're gonna flop. Um, it's just difficult because their mistakes are often in the limelight. So I don't think I'd ever read too much into those things, and I'm sure you don't either. But I also want to say that I think people and players grow and learn, and just because he kind of might have this portrayed ego at the moment doesn't mean that he's gonna stay like that forever. He'll learn from it. He'll maybe become a bit more humble in terms of the move he makes next. And those things are that all they all add up to what makes like a footballer succeed what they want to, I think.
Yeah, I spoke with Circle Bruges' technical director about because he used to work in scouting like 10, 15 years ago. And they said that he used to request like CDs of player highlights, and they had to be like 17, 18 years of age before. So you had to be really interested to go and get like match clips of these players. But as you said there, like over the last few years, as soon as they're 15, 16, like big social media accounts are trying to show off that they've discovered this talent because the clips are there on YouTube, and it is a little bit unhealthy. Like you're right, they are children. We forget about this. We just expect success, especially when they sign for a club. They're like, are they going to lead us to a trophy? Are they going to be great? And it's just remembering that they are actually young humans who, as you said, will make mistakes. But wow, we're leaving the podcast on a really important message there. We don't normally do that. But look, Kish, I really appreciate your time today. Just one more shout out for your TikTok or anything else you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, so you can find me at kish.100 on TikTok, posting 5 or 6 times a week on there, different videos on general football. I'm also doing some work for Eyeball Football, which is a kind of channel that portrays young footballers and the talent, and I kind of analyze them on video. So if you go check out them as well, you can see some of my work on there. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Love talking with you, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Sweet. And yeah, of course, please do subscribe to the podcast across Apple, YouTube, or Spotify. Comment on any of the players who've spoken today, rate us, it all goes a long way. And of course, we have recently launched Substack, so drop a follow on there. We're releasing at least one piece a week at the moment. But until then, stay safe, people.